The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the downtown courthouse as Sarah Thompson straightened her navy blue blazer. Her heart was beating faster than usual, but her face remained calm and composed. At 32 years old, she had faced many challenges in her life, but something about this morning felt different. The hallway outside courtroom 302 was busy with the usual morning crowd. Men and women in suits rushed past, carrying briefcases and checking their phones. Sarah stood out in her perfectly tailored outfit and quiet confidence, yet Judge Richard Harrison would soon prove that appearances didn't always matter. Case number 47B, called out the court clerk, her voice echoing through the wood-paneled room. Sarah Thompson, parking violation. Sarah walked forward, her heels making soft clicks against the polished floor. She had prepared her explanation carefully. The parking ticket had been issued unfairly. She had proof that the parking meter was broken that day. In her hand, she held photographs and even statements from two nearby shop owners who had witnessed the malfunction. Judge Harrison barely looked up from his papers. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him an appearance of wisdom, but his expression was one of boredom and mild irritation. He had been sitting on the bench for 20 years, and to him, this was just another routine morning of traffic violations. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the hint of impatience, "you're here for parking in a restricted zone on Madison Avenue last Tuesday. How do you plead?" Sarah cleared her throat. "Your Honor, I'd like to explain the circumstances. The parking meter was..." "A simple guilty or not guilty will suffice," Judge Harrison interrupted, finally looking at her. His eyes swept over her appearance with a dismissive glance that spoke volumes. The young woman stood straighter. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Several people in the courtroom noticed how the judge's expression changed, a slight tightening around his mouth, a small shake of his head. It was subtle, but clear to anyone watching. He had already made up his mind. "Present your evidence," he said, but his tone suggested he wasn't really interested in hearing it. Sarah began presenting her carefully organized evidence. She showed the pictures of the broken meter, started explaining about the witness statements, but Judge Harrison held up his hand after barely 30 seconds. "Miss Thompson, I've heard enough," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "The city's parking enforcement officer has submitted a clear report. Your photographs could have been taken at any time, and these supposed witness statements..." He paused, looking at the papers with obvious skepticism. "They're not admissible in this format." The court clerk watched with a frown. In her 15 years working in this courtroom, she had seen the judge accept similar evidence in other cases. Something felt different about how he was handling this one. "But Your Honor..." Sarah tried again, her voice steady despite her growing frustration. "If you would just look at..." "That's enough," Judge Harrison said firmly. "This court finds you guilty of the parking violation. The fine will be $300, the maximum penalty for this offense." A small murmur went through the courtroom. The usual fine for a first-time parking violation was $50. Even the bailiff raised his eyebrows slightly at the judge's decision. Sarah stood there for a moment, her dark eyes meeting the judge's cold gaze. She could have argued, could have made a scene, but years of being a black woman in predominantly white spaces had taught her when to pick her battles. Without a word, she nodded respectfully. What Judge Harrison didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that just that morning, Sarah had closed a deal worth millions for her healthcare technology company. The $300 fine meant nothing to her financially, but the principle of it, the familiar sting of being prejudged, that was something different entirely. As she turned to leave the courtroom, a young journalist sitting in the background was already typing rapidly on his phone. He had recognized her from a recent Forbes magazine cover, and this story was too important to ignore. By tomorrow morning, Judge Harrison would learn exactly who he had dismissed so casually in his courtroom. Sarah walked out of the courthouse into the bright morning sun, her head held high. This wasn't the first time she had faced prejudice, and it probably wouldn't be the last. But like every other obstacle in her path, she would turn this one into another stepping stone toward greater change. 2 hours after leaving the courthouse, Sarah Thompson sat in her corner office on the 30th floor of the city's most prestigious business district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the skyline, but she wasn't looking at it. Instead, her eyes were fixed on the parking ticket and court papers on her glass desk. "You should have let me handle it," said Michael Chen, her company's legal advisor, shaking his head as he paced the room. Or at least let me come with you. That's literally what you pay me for, Sarah. Sarah smiled slightly, turning her leather chair to face him. Michael, if I called you every time someone treated me unfairly, you never have time for actual legal work. The office around them buzzed with activity. Through the glass walls, dozens of employees could be seen working at their computers or hurrying between meetings. Tech Health Solutions, the company Sarah had built from scratch 5 years ago, now employed over 200 people. Besides, she continued, I had a more important meeting this morning. She gestured to the contract sitting on her desk, freshly signed and worth $75 million. The investment would help expand their healthcare app to 5 more states, providing affordable medical consultations to thousands of underserved communities. Michael was about to respond when Sarah's assistant, Jessica, rushed in. Sarah, you need to see this, she said, holding up her phone. Someone from the courthouse posted about what happened this morning. It's going viral. Sarah took the phone and read the post. A court reporter had recognized her and shared the story on social media. Just watch Judge Harrison fine a black woman $300 for a parking ticket, treating her like she was nobody. Plot twist, she's Sarah Thompson, CEO of Tech Health Solutions, worth millions and changing healthcare access for thousands. Wonder if he would have treated her differently if he'd known. The post already had thousands of shares and comments. Sarah handed the phone back to Jessica, her expression thoughtful. Let's not respond yet, she said calmly. Just then, her own phone buzzed. It was her mother, Dr. Patricia Thompson, calling from her medical practice across town. Sarah answered, putting it on speaker. Baby, I just saw what happened. Her mother's warm voice filled the room. Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom, Sarah assured her. It's nothing I haven't dealt with before. That's exactly what bothers me, Dr. Thompson replied. 25 years of being one of the few black female doctors in this city, and things haven't changed as much as they should have. Sarah looked at the photos on her wall. One showed her mother in her white coat, standing proudly in front of her first clinic. Another showed Sarah as a little girl, sitting at her mother's desk, pretending to write prescriptions. Those moments had shaped her dream of making healthcare more accessible to everyone. Things are changing, Mom, Sarah said firmly. Maybe not fast enough, but they are. This morning, before the court incident, we secured funding to expand our services. We'll be helping thousands more people get affordable health care. Jessica interrupted gently. Sarah, I hate to break this up, but your 2 o'clock is here. The team from Silicon Valley? Sarah nodded, standing up and straightening her blazer. Mom, I've got to go. Important meeting. Go change the world, baby, her mother said proudly before hanging up. As Sarah gathered her materials for the meeting, Michael stopped at the door. What do you want to do about the judge? He asked. Sarah paused, thinking about Judge Harrison's dismissive glance, his refusal to even look at her evidence. Then she thought about the thousands of people who would benefit from today's contract signing. Nothing, she said finally. The best response to prejudice is success. Let's focus on what matters, expanding our services, helping more people. That's worth more than any reaction to one judge's bias. Michael nodded, respecting her decision but making a mental note to keep an eye on the social media storm brewing. He knew Sarah well enough to understand that while she wouldn't seek revenge, she would use this experience to fuel her mission even more. As Sarah walked into the conference room to meet with potential partners from Silicon Valley, she carried herself with the same dignity she'd shown in court. The judge might not have known who she was this morning, but soon enough, everyone would. Marcus Rivera sat at his desk in the local newspaper office, his fingers flying across his keyboard. As the court reporter who had witnessed Judge Harrison's treatment of Sarah Thompson that morning, he knew he had to tell the story right. His initial social media post had already exploded, but now it was time for the full article. Tech CEO faces judicial bias, a story of two worlds, he typed, then paused to take a sip of his now cold coffee. The office buzzed around him, but he remained focused on his screen. Marcus, his editor, Janet Chen, called from across the room. That post of yours is everywhere. CNN just called. They want to pick up the story. Marcus nodded, not surprised. His post had grown from thousands to millions of views in just a few hours. People were sharing screenshots of Sarah's Forbes magazine cover next to stories about Judge Harrison's past controversial decisions. The judge's office keeps calling, Janet added, walking over to his desk. They want to release a statement. Too late, Marcus muttered, scrolling through his phone. Look at this. He showed Janet a video that was trending. Someone had dubbed up footage from a Tech Health Solutions presentation where Sarah spoke about growing up with a single mother who was a doctor and how it inspired her to make healthcare accessible to everyone. The video now had millions of views, with comments comparing her accomplishments to the judge's treatment of her. In another part of town, Sarah's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She sat in her home office, watching as her story spread across the internet. News channels were running side-by-side images, one of Judge Harrison's scowling face from the courthouse security camera, the other of Sarah accepting a Business Innovation Award last year. Her best friend Lisa called on video chat. Girl, you're trending higher than the latest Hollywood scandal. Sarah laughed, but it was a tired sound. That wasn't my intention, Lisa. I just wanted to contest an unfair ticket. Well, sometimes the world needs to see these things, Lisa replied. People are finally talking about what happens in these courtrooms every day. Sarah's phone beeped with another notification. A famous talk show wanted her to appear as a guest. Then another message. A national magazine requesting an interview. Her PR team had been fielding calls all afternoon. Back at the courthouse, Judge Harrison sat in his chambers, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. His secretary had just shown him the viral post and the growing media storm. He saw comments from other people who had appeared in his courtroom, sharing similar stories of dismissive treatment. Judge, his secretary said carefully, the Chief Justice wants to speak with you. Meanwhile, Marcus was finishing his article. He included quotes from other people who had been in the courtroom that morning, describing how the judge had cut Sarah off and refused to look at her evidence. He added details about Tech Health Solutions' recent achievements and their work in providing affordable health care to underserved communities. Just then, his phone rang. It was Sarah Thompson's office. Miss Thompson would like to speak with you, her assistant said. When Sarah came on the line, her voice was calm and professional. Mr. Rivera, I appreciate your attention to this incident, but I want to make something clear. This isn't just about me or Judge Harrison. It's about a system that needs to change. Marcus typed her words carefully. What would you like people to take away from this story? He asked. I want them to understand that success doesn't shield you from prejudice, Sarah replied. But more importantly, I want them to know that no judgment, no bias, no obstacle can stop someone who's determined to make a difference. As Marcus finished his article, social media continued to explode with the story. People were sharing their own experiences with bias in the justice system. Civil rights organizations were calling for investigations into judicial conduct. Sarah Thompson's story had become more than just a viral moment. It was becoming a movement. The sun was setting over the city as Marcus submitted his final draft. Tomorrow, millions would read the full story. But tonight, somewhere in that same city, a judge sat alone in his chambers, forced to confront his biases, while the CEO continued working on her mission to change lives, undeterred by the morning's events. The morning news shows couldn't get enough of the story. Every channel showed split-screen images. On one side, the courthouse where Judge Harrison had fined Sarah Thompson. On the other, the modern offices of Tech Health Solutions where she had built her million-dollar company. This isn't just about one judge or one CEO, said Dr. Regina Williams, a legal expert, speaking on the most-watched morning show. This is about the unconscious bias that exists in our justice system, even in something as simple as a parking ticket. People gathered in coffee shops and offices across the city, their eyes glued to screens as the story unfolded. At City Bean Coffee, just across from the courthouse, the regular morning crowd watched the coverage with particular interest. I appeared in front of that judge last month, said James Martinez, a local teacher, to the barista. He treated me the same way, didn't even look at my evidence for a speeding ticket. The barista, Kelly, nodded as she made his latte. My cousin had the same experience, but nobody cared until it happened to someone famous. In the courthouse break room, clerks and administrative staff huddled around a small TV. They watched as more people came forward with similar stories about Judge Harrison's behavior. Some of the younger staff members shared knowing looks. They had seen this behavior firsthand but had never felt able to speak up. Sarah's phone rang for the 100th time that morning. This time it was her mother again. The hospital is buzzing with your story, Dr. Patricia Thompson told her daughter. One of my patients just told me her daughter signed up for coding classes because of you. She said if a black woman can build a healthcare company and stand up to injustice, her daughter can do anything. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. This wasn't the attention she had wanted, but if it inspired others, maybe something good could come from it. At Tech Health Solutions, employees gathered in the break room, watching their CEO's story spread across the nation. Pride mixed with anger as they discussed the incident. Did you see the company's stock price? One developer whispered to another. It's up 15% since yesterday. People are investing in us just to show support. Outside the courthouse, reporters set up their equipment for live broadcasts. Local community leaders had organized a peaceful gathering to discuss judicial reform. People held signs reading "Justice should be colorblind" and "Reform the system." Among the crowd, a young black law student named Tanya Roberts stood quietly, taking it all in. She had 3 interviews lined up for internships at local law firms, and watching Sarah Thompson's story gave her renewed confidence. Social media continued to buzz. #JudgeThis and #TechHealthJustice became trending topics. People shared their own stories of facing prejudice in professional settings, creating a virtual support network that stretched across the country. In the City Council building, members held an emergency meeting. The incident had sparked demands for a review of the local justice system's bias training programs. We need to look at how our judges are trained, Councilwoman Patricia Martinez argued. One viral incident has exposed a problem that many in our community have faced for years. Back at her office, Sarah prepared for an upcoming press conference. Her PR team had advised her to use this moment to call for major changes in the justice system, but she had other plans. "We're not going to focus on anger," she told her team. "We're going to talk about solutions, about how Tech Health Solutions is making healthcare accessible to everyone, regardless of who they are or how others may judge them." Jessica, her assistant, poked her head in. "Sarah, there's a call from the governor's office. They want you to serve on a new task force for judicial reform." Sarah took a deep breath. This wasn't the path she had expected when she walked into traffic court yesterday morning, but maybe it was the path that was needed. Outside her office window, she could see TV vans parked along the street. Reporters waited for her statement. Social media buzzed with opinions. The whole city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But Sarah remained focused on her mission. In a few hours, she would announce a new initiative to provide free healthcare apps to underserved communities. Because the best response to prejudice wasn't just exposing it, it was creating positive change that no one could ignore. Judge Richard Harrison sat alone in his home study, surrounded by law books and years of awards that now seemed to mock him. The television played quietly in the background, showing yet another news segment about his courtroom encounter with Sarah Thompson. His daughter Rachel had called him 3 times today. As a civil rights attorney in Chicago, she was especially upset by his actions. "Dad," she had said, her voice filled with disappointment, "you've become exactly what you taught me to fight against." Now, in the growing darkness of evening, he found himself watching a documentary about Tech Health Solutions that a news channel was rebroadcasting. On screen, Sarah Thompson spoke passionately about her company's mission. "We created this app because everyone deserves access to healthcare." Sarah's voice came through the speakers. "My mother was a doctor in underserved communities. I saw how people would wait until they were desperately ill because they couldn't afford basic medical care." The judge leaned forward, watching as the program showed families using the Tech Health app to connect with doctors, get prescriptions, and manage their health care at affordable prices. The same woman he had dismissed so quickly in his courtroom had helped millions of people. His phone buzzed. Another message from the Chief Justice. "Emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Be prepared to discuss your conduct and its implications for our court's reputation." Judge Harrison walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. For the first time in his 20 years on the bench, he felt truly ashamed. Not because he had been caught or exposed, but because he was finally seeing himself clearly. He remembered how he had barely looked at Sarah's evidence, how he had cut her off mid-sentence, how he had assumed. What exactly had he assumed? He couldn't even justify his actions to himself anymore. His housekeepers, Maria, and her daughter Luz, used the Tech Health app. Just last week, Luz had told them how the app had helped her mother get medical advice at midnight when she had a severe allergic reaction. The same company whose CEO he had treated with such disrespect had possibly saved his housekeeper's life. The judge walked to his computer and began researching Sarah Thompson's work. Article after article described her journey, graduating top of her class from MIT, turning down high-paying tech jobs to start a company focused on helping others, winning innovation awards, and changing the healthcare industry. Richard, his wife Susan, called from the doorway. "You need to see this." She held up her tablet, showing him TechHealth's latest announcement. Sarah Thompson was launching a new program to provide free healthcare access to low-income communities, starting in their city. The announcement had been planned weeks ago, but the timing made the judge's heart sink even further. While he had been focused on asserting his authority over a parking ticket, she had been preparing to help thousands of people access medical care they couldn't otherwise afford. Judge Harrison sat heavily in his chair, removing his glasses to rub his tired eyes. On his desk sat a framed photo from his first day as a judge. Back then, he had sworn to provide equal justice under law. When had he stopped seeing the people who stood before him as individuals deserving of respect? His secretary texted him the schedule for tomorrow's diversity and bias training session. In 20 years, he had always sent a junior judge in his place. Too busy, he would say. More important matters to attend to. Now those excuses felt hollow. The judge picked up his phone and began typing an email to the Chief Justice. He would attend tomorrow's training personally. But more than that, he wanted to propose changes to their court's procedures. Changes that would help prevent other judges from making the same mistakes he had made. As midnight approached, Judge Harrison was still at his desk, writing notes for tomorrow's meeting. On his computer screen was a paused image of Sarah Thompson speaking at a healthcare conference. Her words below the image read, "True justice, like healthcare, should be accessible to everyone, regardless of who they are or what assumptions others might make about them." The judge had spent his career believing he was dispensing justice. Now he realized that tomorrow would be his first step toward learning what justice really meant. 1 month after the courthouse incident, the city's judicial system looked very different. A large conference room at the Downtown Justice Center was filled with judges, lawyers, and court officials. They sat quietly, listening to Sarah Thompson speak about unconscious bias and its real-world impacts. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Sarah said, standing confidently at the podium. "But it happens the moment we decide to look at ourselves honestly." In the front row, Judge Harrison nodded slowly. After his public apology 3 weeks ago, he had become an unexpected advocate for change within the court system. Today was the first day of a new mandatory training program that he had helped create. The local bar association had turned the incident into a teaching moment. They created a comprehensive bias training program that would be required for all court officials, from judges down to clerks. What had started as a viral scandal was becoming a model for other cities to follow. Sarah's assistant, Jessica, slipped into the room and handed her a note. TechHealth Solutions' new free healthcare initiative had just reached its first milestone. Over 10,000 low-income families in the city now had access to medical care through their app. "Success isn't just about making money," Sarah continued, looking directly at the audience. "It's about creating positive change. Sometimes that change comes from unexpected places, even from a simple parking ticket." A few people chuckled, but most nodded thoughtfully. Among them was Marcus Rivera, the reporter who had first broken the story. He was working on a follow-up article about the reforms sparked by the incident. After the presentation, Judge Harrison approached Sarah. Unlike their first meeting, he now looked her in the eye with respect. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice carrying genuine remorse, "I can't undo my actions that day, but I want you to know that you've changed more than just our training programs. You've changed how I see my role as a judge." Sarah smiled warmly. "Change is all any of us can ask for, Your Honor." Across town, at the city's biggest hospital, Dr. Patricia Thompson was showing her patients how to use the TechHealth app. Many of them were the same people who might appear in traffic court or other minor cases, people who often felt the system worked against them. "My daughter didn't just build an app," she explained to a young mother struggling with healthcare costs. "She built a bridge to help people access what they deserve." Back at the Justice Center, the training session continued with group discussions. Judges shared stories of times they might have let biases affect their decisions. Court clerks talked about changes they'd seen since the incident. The atmosphere was open and honest, something rare in the usually formal courthouse. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her team. The company's new mentorship program for young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds had received over 1,000 applications. Many applicants mentioned being inspired by how she had handled the courthouse incident. After the session, a young black female clerk approached Sarah. "I've been afraid to apply to law school," she admitted. "I wasn't sure there was a place for someone like me in the legal system. But seeing how you turned this incident into positive change, it gave me courage." Sarah reached into her bag and handed the clerk her business card. "Apply to law school," she said firmly. "The system needs people who understand the importance of both justice and compassion." As the day ended, Sarah stood by the courthouse steps where everything had started. News vans were gone now, replaced by signs announcing the new bias training program. The viral moment had passed, but its impact remained. Judge Harrison exited the building, noticing Sarah on the steps. He paused, then walked over to join her. "We're installing new parking meters next week," he said with a slight smile. "Ones that actually work." Sarah laughed. Sometimes the smallest changes lead to the biggest transformations. Together, they looked at the courthouse, an old building learning new lessons. In her pocket, Sarah's phone buzzed with more messages about Tech Health's successes, but for now, she just enjoyed the moment. Sometimes justice came in unexpected ways, and change happened in places where you least expected it. 6 months after the courthouse incident, Sarah Thompson and Judge Richard Harrison stood side by side in the auditorium of Central High School. The room was packed with students from different schools across the city, all eager to hear about their new mentorship program called Justice Meets Innovation. "Sometimes your biggest critics can become your strongest allies," Sarah said into the microphone, glancing at Judge Harrison with a smile. The students listened intently as she continued. "And sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best opportunities for change." The judge stepped forward to share his part of the story. His voice, once harsh and dismissive, now carried warmth and humility. "I made a mistake that day in court," he admitted to the young audience. "But Miss Thompson showed me that true leadership isn't about proving others wrong, it's about making things right." Their unlikely partnership had started 3 months ago when Judge Harrison had called Sarah's office requesting a meeting. Instead of a quick apology, their conversation had lasted 4 hours. They discovered they shared a common goal: creating opportunities for young people who felt the system was against them. Today was the launch of their first joint project. The program would pair students interested in law or business with mentors from both fields. Judge Harrison would bring in lawyers and judges, while Sarah would connect students with successful entrepreneurs and tech leaders. "Remember," Sarah told the students, "success isn't just about making money or winning cases. It's about lifting others up as you climb." In the back of the room, Marcus Rivera took notes for another follow-up story. The unlikely friendship between the judge and the CEO had become a symbol of how people could move past their differences to create positive change. During the question and answer session, a young black girl stood up. "I want to be both a lawyer and a business owner," she said. "But people tell me I have to choose one path." Judge Harrison looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Young lady," the judge replied, "the person standing next to me proves that you don't have to choose. You can be whatever you want to be, and you can change the system from wherever you stand." After the presentation, Sarah and Judge Harrison sat in the school cafeteria, sharing coffee and discussing their next project. They wanted to create a scholarship fund for students who planned to study either law or technology with a focus on social justice. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be working with the judge who fined me unfairly, I wouldn't have believed it," Sarah said, stirring her coffee. The judge chuckled. "And if someone had told me I'd be learning about tech startups from someone I once dismissed in my courtroom, I wouldn't have believed that either." Their conversation was interrupted by the school principal, Mrs. Rodriguez. "You won't believe this," she said excitedly. "After your presentation, 30 students signed up for our new coding club, and 25 registered for the Law Society. This has never happened before." Outside the school, news crews were setting up their equipment. The story of Sarah and Judge Harrison's partnership had caught national attention. Other cities were reaching out, wanting to start similar programs. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her mother. Proud of you, baby. You didn't just prove him wrong, you helped him become better. That's real leadership." As they prepared to leave, a group of students approached them for photos. One boy asked Judge Harrison if he still worked as a judge. "Yes," the judge replied, "but I'm a different kind of judge now. Thanks to Ms. Thompson, I learned that justice isn't just about following laws. It's about seeing people for who they really are." Sarah watched as the judge handed out his card to the students, encouraging them to reach out if they needed guidance. 6 months ago, he had refused to even look at her evidence. Now he was helping young people believe in themselves and their dreams. As they walked to their cars, Sarah and Judge Harrison discussed their next presentation. They had been invited to speak at a national conference about transforming conflict into collaboration. "You know," the judge said, stopping by his car, "that parking ticket was probably the most expensive mistake I ever made." Sarah laughed. "And the best investment I ever made," she replied. "Sometimes justice works in mysterious ways." 1 year had passed since that memorable morning in traffic court. The sun rose over the city skyline, casting a golden glow on the Tech Health Solutions building where Sarah Thompson stood at the podium, addressing a crowd of reporters, investors, and employees. "Today, as we celebrate our company going public," Sarah announced, her voice steady and strong, "we're not just marking a business success. We're celebrating what happens when we turn obstacles into opportunities." The stock exchange would soon ring its opening bell, making Tech Health Solutions the largest healthcare technology company to go public that year. But more importantly, Sarah had become one of the youngest black female CEOs of a publicly traded company in the country. In the front row, Dr. Patricia Thompson wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter. Next to her sat Judge Richard Harrison, now retired from the bench, but more active than ever in community work. He had traded his judge's robe for a role as a leading advocate for diversity and inclusion in the legal system. "Our company's value isn't just measured in dollars," Sarah continued, gesturing to the screens behind her showing Tech Health's impact. "It's measured in the millions of lives we've touched. Last year alone, we provided healthcare access to over 500,000 families who couldn't afford it before." The numbers told an impressive story. Tech Health's app was now used in 20 states, their free healthcare initiative had expanded to 50 cities, and their mentorship program with Judge Harrison had helped hundreds of young people start careers in law and technology. After the ceremony, Sarah found a quiet moment in her office. On her wall hung 2 framed items: the parking ticket that had started everything, and the Forbes magazine cover naming her Innovator of the Year. Between them was a photograph of her and Judge Harrison speaking at their most recent youth program graduation. Her assistant Jessica knocked on the door. "Your mother and Judge Harrison would like a moment," she said with a smile. They entered, Dr. Thompson immediately hugging her daughter. "Your father would have been so proud," she whispered. Judge Harrison waited respectfully, then stepped forward. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a check for $300 made out to charity. "The exact amount of that parking fine," he explained. "I've written one every month this year to different community organizations." Sarah smiled, remembering how different things had been a year ago. "How's the judicial training program going?" she asked. 20 more courts have adopted our bias training model," he replied proudly. "And that young clerk you encouraged? She just got accepted to law school with a full scholarship." The conversation was interrupted by breaking news on the office TV. Tech Health stock had opened at double the expected price. The company was now valued at over $1 billion. But what caught Sarah's eye was the crawler at the bottom of the screen. Tech Health Solutions announces free healthcare app for all low-income families nationwide. "You didn't tell them about the nationwide expansion," Judge Harrison observed. Sarah smiled. "Some announcements deserve their own moment. Tomorrow's press conference will focus on that, the real measure of our success." Looking out her office window, Sarah could see the courthouse where everything had started. The old parking meters had been replaced, but the real changes went much deeper. The courthouse now hosted regular community outreach programs, and every judge in the city had gone through the bias training program she and Judge Harrison had helped design. "You know," her mother said, following her gaze, "sometimes I think about what would have happened if you just paid that ticket quietly. Then we would have missed out on a lot of change," Judge Harrison admitted. Sarah turned to them both. Life isn't about avoiding unfair moments, she said. It's about what we choose to do with them. As they headed to the celebration lunch, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. Another city wanted to adopt their mentorship program. Judge Harrison peeked at the message and laughed. Shall we add it to next month's schedule? Sarah nodded, thinking about all the young people they could help. The parking ticket that had once seemed like an injustice had become a catalyst for change, touching more lives than she could have imagined. You know what they say, she smiled, stepping into the elevator. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment to create something better.